Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Oh, Corey. Poirier, right?
Yeah, I would say the best that I can do is Poirier.
The best that you can do is Corey?
No, the best I can do is Poirier. So
Poirier.
how you
Okay.
said it is the best that I can do, and I say the best that I can do because I think you might have done it marginally better than me. So yeah, you nailed it. I say that because it's a very French name, and I say it in a very English way.
Okay. Okay. Today we have Corey Poirier. He is a speaker, an author, and a podcaster. And we're here today to talk about his new book, The Enlightened Passenger, which is a fascinating take um, with wisdom that he's derived from interviewing over 7,000 thought leaders. So, welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast, Corey.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea. I'm super stoked to be here. And as you mentioned off air about our connection from before, we actually shared not only the as we like to say the bill, but even the same literal stage back in the day at Podcast Movement, which I think is awesome.
Yes. I think it was like 2018 or 17 even. I don't know. I just started my podcast. So,
I would say it had to be at least then because of the fact that it was definitely pre-COVID. So I know it
yeah.
was pre-2019. And 2019, we launched a brand that we run now, which is really busy. And I would have remembered if it was during that. So I think you're right. It's definitely 2018 or earlier and not later.
Yeah, yeah. And then we were on each other's shows. Yeah, that was fun. And so it's fun to have you back. And it's fun to have you back to talk about this book because I actually really love the concept. I love the concept of your show. Can you tell us a little bit about the show and how it kind of led to the book?
Yeah. So it's funny because that, like, I can say, like, almost, I could blow that off with like, oh, here to here, but I have to say it was a big journey,
Oh,
meaning
I'm
like
sure.
there's a lot in between those two areas, but to try to answer it as succinctly as possible, but
We're not
cover.
in a rush, Corey.
Okay, fair enough. Uh,
We're here to
Fair enough.
chat.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I say that maybe even to forewarn you that I may be talking for a minute or two to answer that. But having said that, basically, we launched my show way back in 2002-ish. So what is that? 20? Is that 22 years? Yeah, 22
Jeez, that's a
years.
long time.
Like, yeah, it was blog talk radio is what I launched on. Like then there wasn't, I'm gonna say, well, I'm pretty confident. I'd have to look at the dates, but I'm pretty confident to say Apple, iTunes didn't even exist. It definitely didn't exist for podcasts,
You were
for
like
sure.
the third podcaster alive or something.
Yes, exactly. John Lee Dumas was the fourth.
Okay,
John Lee
okay.
Dumas from Entrepreneurs on Fire. I say that because I say that because John, I know started like 2 months after me. Like it was around the same timeline. Pat Flynn was before me, so Pat was the first podcast.
Okay,
Some
okay.
maybe Mark Maron was second, I was third, and John was fourth. If people are listening to this, just to say this may not be accurate, but I did start a long time ago in podcasting, and again, I called it online radio. Ironically, then it was actually seemed more prestigious to say online radio because not long after that, I don't remember exact timeline, but Stitcher rate came out, and I maybe 4 or 5 years later. But at some point, you could play Stitcher in your car, so you could actually play podcast in your car. So that's how we promoted, positioned ourselves. Like you can now even listen to us at X amount of cars. Now, and I was very blunt about this. You can listen to us, but not saying you are because it's two different things, as you know. Like if there's 10,000 podcasts to choose from, there might be 50 listening to one show. There might be 100,000 listening to another. Having said that, that's how long ago I started in podcasting, and my journey, like I say, from there, it definitely wasn't a straight line, but it kind of started like I started speaking not long before that. And the speaking and interviewing really, in a lot of ways, launched everything that's sort of happened since. What I find fascinating and how it does tie, like I'll put a ribbon on how that ties to the new book. I mean, and we can explore, there's so much in between there, but how it ties to the new book, which is kind of fascinating, is the new book is called The Enlightened Passenger. It's about two people on a plane, two strangers, passengers, on a plane, young guy, old guy. Young guy is like a business person that's like arrogant, what have you, and thinks he knows it all. He pays for the seat next to him in first class, so he doesn't have to have anybody next to him. falls asleep, wakes up to an old guy sitting next to him. And he's like, where did this guy come from? The old guy told him I got bumped because the light was full. And he's like, basically like, I'm going to go back to sleep and ignore this old guy until really quickly he discovers that the old guy has created some wealth. And then he's like, oh, now I want to know what this old guy can teach me. And what he doesn't realize until not long after is, yes, the old guy has become wealthy financially, but when the old guy's talking wealth, he's meaning as a wealthy person, like a rich person, meaning like when we talk like the book Think and Grow Rich, when you get the book, you think it's going to help you get rich, but what you don't realize is going to make you a different person. And like Jim Rohn said that you can make $1 million and give it all away and it won't matter because it's about who you became in the process of becoming that. And so that's kind of like this scenario is the guy saying, you know, I've reached a level of fulfillment, of chill, of where I'm happy, where I don't have to go. And that's what he means by rich, even though financially he's rich. But the young guy only hears rich and goes, I need to learn from this guy. So he becomes a reluctant passenger, listening to the wisdom of this older guy. And the old guy basically teaches his life lessons that he learned on his journey to the younger guy. And it's called The Flight That Changes Everything for a very specific reason. And I kind of, it's probably hinted by what I just shared. But how that all ties into starting the show and speaking is that the book is loosely based on me and my life. So in other words, the character named Treb, who's the older guy, and the younger guy, I was in some ways both of them. And so it's kind of like a mixture. And my hope is the reader is one of the two of them or somewhere in between. And they feel like if they're the younger one, that it's being taught to them. But the lessons themselves, where they come from, is my interviews, 7,500 now interviews with thought leaders over the last, almost, 20 some years. And so the lessons that are in the book are basically Treb teaching the lessons that I learned. But what I tried to do, Andrea, is bring it down to what are the top 10 that I've learned that I wish I would have known when I started. And the other side that makes it about me and how it ties to all these interviews in terms of the connection is in the book. I reference, so the characters are fictional, obviously, but I reference real thought leaders and people that I learned from as if the character knew them. So in other words, Treb talks about being backstage in the green room with Les Brown and asks Les Brown about synchronicity. And Les says, to me, synchronicity is God's way of staying anonymous. Well, the reader wouldn't know that, but Les said that to me in his living room in Atlanta. And I turned it into, he told that to Treb backstage. So it actually, when you asked how does the show kind of relate to the book, in a lot of ways, without all those interviews that made up the show, the book doesn't exist because it's in a lot of ways inspired by those conversations and what I learned. So hopefully I summarized that well in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, definitely. Oh man. So I think that's really, I mean, that's partly why I wanted to be, why I wanted to do a podcast too, is to learn from other people. And I probably had some other thoughts about that too, like other motivations as well. But it certainly is a outcome of interviewing so many people and having so many conversations is just everything that you take in and the wisdom that you gain and how that impacts you. So I'm kind of curious, what have you seen as an impact on your own life just by being curious, by listening?
So ultimately, whenever I started my journey, I battled hypochondria, generalized anxiety for about 4 years in my early 20s. And up to that point, and including that point, I know now, I didn't know then, that you can't ultimately be so negative you think you're going to die tomorrow every day, and at the same time be a high energy, positive person helping other people. It's hard to coexist. And so pre any of these interviews, that's who I was. I was this person that unsure of myself. In school, I barely got by. Like I got a 49+1 in one of my classes. I talk about that often, and I needed that class to graduate, and I needed a 50. So the teacher gave me a +1. Like I didn't even earn that. So I always say, like technically, he probably didn't graduate, but legally I did. And so that was where I was at. So I wasn't written about in the yearbook saying most likely to succeed or anything like that. And then I got out of school, and the way I look at it now, again, didn't know that then, is I was searching for something. I was searching for meaning in my life, and I didn't have it. And so I think it came out in other ways, like me, reading about a certain disease. That all started was I read about Michael J. Fox being diagnosed with Parkinson's and being so young. And I'm like, that can happen to a young person. And then literally the next day I had tremors. Like and it started this whole thing. And it's kind of wild when you're in that box that you can't really fully be logical. Like, in other words, they would do all these tests and say, you definitely don't have Parkinson's. And I'd be like, oh, great. Awesome. Clean bill of health. 4 days later, oh my God, I think I have MS. That's what it was. And I would just go down that spiral, and it was like, and it never stopped for 4 years. I mean, I always say that the doctor's offices in the place I lived had coffee mugs with my name on it and even a paycheck by the end of the week. And it was almost true. And I've jokingly said, like, it maybe not such a great joke, but I might have been responsible early on for the shortages, like I was there that often. Now, having said that, how that all again ties into these interviews is what finally changed all that. First of all, I'd be remiss not to say that it first changed when I got on trick to perform stand-up comedy one night. And then I somehow discovered that was a little bit of a passion. And once I discovered, and I always say now, I took vitamin P from that day forward, vitamin P for passion. And I say it's the only vitamin you can't buy in stores, but the most important one you'll ever take. And so I started taking vitamin P, and that's what started the journey to me then doing interviews. And what the interviews did, to again, full circle this to the actual answer, what the interviews did, and by listening to the people I was interviewing, which was not always easy as somebody who likes to talk, but what the interviews did is they started teaching me these little hacks and shortcuts and insights that if I applied this thing, I saw change. And it started early on with like little ones and then bigger and bigger. But early on, it could be just as simple as after interviewing an X amount of people, I noticed that when I talked to them about saying yes and no to things, more of them said no. And then I started exploring that more, and I found it, oh, wow, high achievers say no like 50 times more than the average person. That's fascinating. Maybe I should start figuring out how to say no, because I grew up in a small town as a yes person. So I started saying no awkwardly, burning bridges, not trying to, and then eventually got better at it. And now, I mean, I end up saying yes to a bit more than I probably even used to, because now it seems like what comes to me is more aligned. But back then it was like, I was so ready to say yes to everything that it seemed like all these things that weren't aligned would come to me, and I'd be, yep, yep, yep. And so that's just an example of one thing that started changing was I listened, I tried it, it changed things. I like, oh, wow, maybe I'll try this other one. Oh, I noticed that these leaders expand their comfort zone a lot. Well, I'm going to go jump out of a plane foolishly. Oh, I did. I survived. Okay, well, now I wonder if I could try this. Oh, wait, what if I try stand-up comedy? And so again, it was like the fear of, at that point, not really realizing my full potential was bigger than the fear of doing the thing. But that also was spurred by those interviews. So I think it was really, at the end of the day, it wasn't just interviewing thought leaders. It was after a certain amount of time being able to see what they do and what they had in common, and then say, if they're all doing this and I'm not, I'm the problem. Meaning I got to fix that. And so again, hopefully that answered the question, but it changed how I started approaching everything in life, how I started thinking, is this possible? What would this mean? What if I tried this? And it actually got me to take action on doing that.
That's really fascinating. A couple things came up for me, and I was wondering if there's any connection. Do you see any connection between the hypochondria kind of approach and an approach of being curious about what these people are saying? I mean, I guess what I'm noticing is that you kind of turned your focus a little bit. You turned your focus more toward more positive things, and almost like you became just as obsessed with those things as you had been with the negative things. So I'm just wondering, like, what have you seen with that? Is that something that you've noticed, or is that even, am I off?
Well, I mean, I feel like it's kind of funny because on my desk right now, I have this poker chip that says PMA on it, and PMA stands for positive mental attitude. And it's from a book that I read called Success Through a Positive Mental Attitude, which I probably have somewhere because I'm reading it currently still right now. It's written by W. Clement Stone and Napoleon Hill. And Napoleon Hill did this in Think Grow Rich too. He said there's a big secret coming up, and the secret in this one was PMA, and you didn't know what it stood for. They revealed it in like chapter 3 or 4. What I find fascinating is it was literally in the title of the book, and I didn't clue in. So Success Through a Positive Mental Attitude, PMA. And then they said the other side, so what they said is people carrying a visible talisman. One side says PMA, one side says NMA, which is negative mental attitude. And I decided if I'm going to print this thing, I'm not going to put negative on this at all. I'm just going to put both positive. But having said that, I carry that around as a constant reminder now. But what I did early on, and of course I still do this too, is I started right from those early interviews, seeing how positive these thought leaders were, seeing how they looked at things different than me. And what I started doing is I started practicing it. I started saying, what if I were to practice more positivity? And what if I were to, and that's what I would say, I call them posits now in a cheesy way, but a positive deposit. What if I started depositing good stuff in over and over again? And then maybe that'll deflect the odd time the bad stuff gets in. And that's what happened, Andrea, is that I put the positive in, kept filling that tank. And eventually it's almost like Teflon. Like I've got so much positive built up that one time something crappy happens, it's just like, okay, that happened. And then the other thing that happened is I got to see through the eyes of these thought leaders how they were hit with all these negative things too, but approached it differently. And then the next thing that happened, which this kind of all happened in different steps, but eventually you get to see, you have what I call reference points where you can look back now and say, you know what, that was crappy at the time. I would have wished it away, but it didn't matter a year later. And not only that, sometimes it was what was necessary for me to have this major success I had later. And so, and then I'd listen to a talk by Steve Jobs, his Stanford commencement address, where he talked about how he had 3 dots in his life where they were responsible for everything. And one of them was him getting fired from Apple. Well, I'm sure we can say when Steve Jobs, the day he got fired from Apple, wasn't a happy dude. I mean, that was his baby. But before he passed, he said that was necessary for him to become the Steve Jobs later who created the iPad, the iPod, the iPhone, and ended up owning the largest share of Disney and creating Pixar. And look at all the movies that kids got to enjoy because of Pixar. All that happened because he got fired. So what I'm getting at is that being able to see that thought leaders that had achieved at the highest level had struggles, and often those struggles were responsible for their successes. Me being able to see that started happening with me being able to interview them and see that they somehow looked at all these things that we view as the end of the world and just viewed it as another bump in the road. I think being able to see all of that, to your point, also had a major impact on my mindset, which then impacted the fact that I couldn't really have that all that negative juice in my body at the same time as well.
Oh, yeah. You know, we don't talk about this a whole lot on our show, but I think you're right. I think that there's so much wisdom out there from the ages. I mean, from religious texts to people that say, feed yourself with good things. And you know, your mind, your body, your heart, all those things, and that's an important piece of living a healthy life. And do you think that that's also had an impact on your relationships? I don't know how much you talk about relationships, your relationships, but you know, like I think that's another piece of it too. We can tend to look negatively and have a paranoia about relationships and the way that people are interacting with us, or we can try to, you know, see possibilities, I guess. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I believe it definitely has had an impact on, yeah, my relationships as well. I often, a quote that I shared years ago, and it's funny with all these quotes, I hate I should own them, but sometimes I feel bad owning them because of the fact that I often wonder if some of it seeped in from another quote or another person. And so where
I get
things
that.
attributed to 5 different leaders, I should just start owning it and saying, I think it's my quote to me, at least in my perspective. Don't know that I ever got it from anybody. So I'm just going to own this. But one of my quotes is that I think we spend a lot of time focus on what we feed our body, and sadly, nowhere's near enough time on what we feed our mind. And so going back to your point, and there's a great book called what is it? The Magic of Thinking Big, where I think he calls it mind food. And I only read that book for the first time recently, actually. It's from the 50s. And then I was like, oh, that's what I was talking about, mind food. I find that too. Whenever you start teaching a lot, you eventually discover, oh, somebody else is teaching the same thing. 3 or 4 of the things I taught for years, my friend Tiffany was at Jack Canfield, trained the trainer. She goes, oh, Jack teaches that too. And I was like, okay, there you go. But anyway, having said that, mind food or what you feed your mind, I think ultimately is everything. Like I think what we feed our body is obviously important too, but what we feed our mind, I think, is ultimately everything. And and so I think because I chose to start feeding my mind stuff that was, whatever words we want to put on it, uplifting, empowering, maybe even just stimulating my intellect. And I don't even use words like that often, but stimulating my intellect. I think those things had to carry over into my relationships. So for instance, if whenever I thought I had, when I had hypochondria and I thought I had everything under the sun, even though I tried to hide that from people, and even though I was still on the outside, looked like I was very positive, I think that had to carry over. Like there had to be parts of me that was like cranky every now and then without realizing it, or maybe snap at somebody in my life without realizing it. Like I have to believe that I wasn't the same person I am now, knowing what I know now. And so I think that well, I know it changed me at my core. And so I think that had to seep its way into my relationships. What I do know on that side is so how positive I became is that, first of all, I put a thing out there. I put a post one time, this is going back years ago. And I said, if anybody can ever catch me on a day where I'm not truly happy, you let me know and I'll write you a check for $1,000. Nobody has cashed that check. And so, and by the way, it's not fake, because there's one thing about faking till you make it. It's not. It's truly, I wake up every day feeling like that kid that loves Christmas. And so I don't know how you could do that and it not you positively affect all of your relationships in your life. Having said, and also even like people in my life that were more negative throughout the years have said, thank you so much, because you always give me, when we talk, you always make me realize there is a positive spin to this. Even if I go back to negative right away again shortly after, you give me that feeling for a short term, you know what? That's right. I never looked at it that way, or what have you. And so even that's an impact, I think, in somebody's life. But one story that comes to mind is I had this girl I was dating one time that she used to ask me to wake her up because she liked to sleep in a lot. And she asked me to wake her up before work. And this one day, I remember I woke her up and she's like, I just tried to lightly tap her. And I was like, hey, just want to let you know it's time to get up. And she got up and she goes, thanks for ruining my day. I was having a great dream, a great sleep, and you ruined my day. And like, from my end, I was just trying to wake her up for work. And I was the person that was going to be driving her to work. She didn't drive. So like, I'm waking you up, I'm driving you. But her perspective was, you ruined my day. And I said, well, if that ruined your day, you know, I feel sad, really, because you're going to give away a whole day because of what started in 1 minute in the day. And then she, said, you're a robot. You don't have any feelings and whatever. And so, I guess that, first of all, told me maybe who I wasn't a good fit with. But what I'm saying also is that on its own is a different guy than the guy that thought he had hypochondria. That guy would have been like, yeah, let's just sleep in for another 3 hours, or don't worry if you miss work, I'll drive you in and we'll apologize. Like, it was a different guy. So instead of letting her bring me down and ruin my day after she said I ruined hers, I just went on like, la, 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 like, just, I'm going to go bring my own sunshine to everybody else. And so again, I know that was like not a full direct yes, it impacted all my relationships, but I think it is a yes, it impacted all my relationships indirectly.
Interesting. Okay, so you've interviewed so many amazing people. Do you have any interviews that really stick out? And do you feel like you can even say that after, so many?
Yeah, some for the right reason, some for the wrong reason. Often the ones for the wrong reason, I won't say a name, but I'll say a story. And two stories actually I could share with you that were for the wrong reason, and then I'll share one or two for the good reasons.
Great.
But wrong reason, one of them was a person that I promoted a long time, didn't know them, but promoted them a long time, scheduled an interview with them. We got on the interview, and the person, very blunt person, which I knew that from reading their books, but I literally, they in a lot of ways indirectly helped with my speaking career and everything. So I really looked up to them. And we started the interview and I said, my approach is different, I realized, than some interviews. And I know if he's doing a 3-minute segment, he'd be used to just like, up next, we have New York Times bestselling author so-and-so, and hi, Roger, welcome to the show. But what I did was I said, I just wanted to thank you for being involved. And instead of me reading a bio that, I might be stilted or might not be reading correctly, I just love to get you to tell us even 1 minute, or less about yourself. And he didn't like that. He said, if they're tuning in and they're listening, they should know who I am. And then it just went downhill for about 5 minutes. And then I said, I'll get your permission to ask, but I kind of think this interviews went off the rails. And based on the energy we both have here now, I don't think it's going to get back on the track at all. And he goes, I agree. And we just ended it that way. So that was awkward for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
That's the only one that's ever happened like that. A middle one that I forgot about is I had an interview with a guy who was Canadian celebrity. He just shared and overshared really all stuff about his life and his journey. And then I got a message from his publicist saying, you can't air that interview. He wasn't supposed to say all these things. And we never aired the interview. And we were supposed to actually take the interview and put it in a book that I wrote where we featured all these thought leaders. And because we couldn't put it on the show, we also weren't allowed to put it in the book. So that
Yeah.
was surprising because he was so open about it. And I said, is it okay if we share this? He goes, absolutely. Like he was fine with share, but I guess they must have been listening on the back end. I have no idea. I don't know. The reasoning might have been something happened in between then and the when they messaged me. And the third one was a really big name. I'll say this much: spiritual thought leader. And it wasn't, this one didn't really, it wasn't their fault. It didn't kind of go off the rails. But I asked the first question and they said, did you even read my new book? And I said, well, nobody in your team sent it to me. She goes, they didn't. Well, I need to have a talk to them. They were supposed to send you the book and mention it. Then they didn't. So it wasn't my fault, but she's like, do you want to reschedule the interview? And I knew if I said yes, we would never get on another call. Not because she would not want to be back on with me, but just her schedule. It took so long to schedule. So I'm like, you know what? Are you okay? I mean, we're on now. We've already committed the time. Are you okay to give me like just 3 talking points you want me to ask, and then we'll just let it go from there? And she said, yeah, sure. And we did it, and you'd never know in the interview, and it came across fine. But it was a unique situation. Like it was almost at first like she was mad that they sent me a book I didn't read, but then she found out they didn't send me the book. I had no idea what she was talking about. I knew she had a new book out, and I was planning to get there, but I had no idea she had talking points she wanted people to ask. So those were some that kind of were for the wrong reasons. I remember them. The right reasons, one that stands out is Robin Sharma, who wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. And Robin is a Canadian icon in a lot of ways. 11 international best-selling books. He's spoken on every stage. He's coached the Dalai Lama, I believe, and presidents. And so Robin Sharma is from Pictou, Nova Scotia, even though he's originally from, I think, South Africa, but at age 1 from Pictou, Nova Scotia. And that's the region I lived in. So I was really looked up to him and what he had achieved. And anyway, I did the interview with Robin, but again, like same idea. It took a long time to schedule it, and I had a toothache that was like my tooth had to be pulled. I only found that out later, but it was a mega toothache, and the only thing that would ease it was drinking water. So I think I drank like 100,000 gallons of water during our interview, and then I couldn't even do the pleasantries after. I was like, okay, I gotta go, and like literally bailed. And so that was not, but I don't see that as the wrong reasons. It made for me, it's a memorable moment that was like, I still did the interview. It still went okay. But what I learned from Robin during that interview that also stood out is 2 things he shared. One for sure, I know he learned from somebody else. I think he said Warren Buffett, but he talked about reverse engineering your life and basically figuring out who you want to be as an 80-year-old sitting on your porch, and then figuring out what you have to do in the years previous to that to become that person, and then literally setting your year up that way each year. So basically building your year based on your end goal. And I mean, it's not easy to do, but it'd be like saying, okay, if I want to be a New York Times bestselling author, I want to have 3 kids, I want to, all that stuff. Then you got to figure out, what do I have to start doing today to start that journey? It might not happen the way you planned, but at least planning it out, I think, is huge. So that was one thing he said. And another thing he said was about how he feels that most people die in their 20s, but they wait until they're 80 to bury their own body. And he said he calls them the walking dead. And basically what he's talking about is when we walk around in our life without any aim, any meaning, any purpose. Napoleon Hill would call it aim or definiteness of purpose. For me, it was meaning that changed everything, finding meaning in my life. But sadly, the numbers I hear is like less than 5% will ever find meaning or purpose in their life and go to their graves like that. So that was a big one to me. He called it The Walking Dead, and then he said something about zombies as well. But it stuck out to me as what I want to do. And part of what I want to do is help people find meaning in their life, because I don't want as many Walking Dead people walking around. And so that interview obviously stood out. And then finally, another one was Lisa Nichols. And we've done multiple interviews, but at the end of one of the interviews, she said to me, and it's in my Sizzle highlight reel, but she said, well, the camera's still rolling, but not intentionally. She said, I said, thank you. And she goes, no, thank you for what you do. I remember the wording. So thank you for what you do. She said, I've done many interviews over the last 5 months, like 155. I think it was the exact number. And she said, and they got out stuff. They said stuff to me that I heard over and over again, and they kind of all ran together. But you got stuff out of me that nobody ever has in my life. And she said, so I want to thank you, because I feel we're doing a dance and I'm only as good as my dance partner. So thank you for what you do in the world, and thank you for your gift. So that for me is a validation that I I did the interview for impact. It wasn't just like Corey wants to find this out or I'm trying to learn here. It was literally like if I brought stuff out of Lisa she's never shared, then I asked the right questions. I was in the right spot at the right time. I'll tell you, if you believe in law of attraction, manifestation, stuff like that, a really wild backstory is that earlier in that same day, I was in San Francisco interviewing John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars. And John shared to me that how he manifested, which is different than what I usually hear. And he said he actually acted as if his agent was calling him saying, John, your book's on the New York Times list. Now, this was before it was. So like he did this for 8 years, he said every day. So before it was. So he said, John, you're on the New York Times list. And then he said he would act as if a couple was coming up to him and saying, thanks for saving our marriage with your talk about relationships. And so that's what he did every day. So he acted as if somebody else was saying it to him versus saying, John's a New York Times bestselling author. So I thought that was fascinating. So on my way I flew to San Diego to interview Lisa. On my way in the car to the interview, I said to myself, I'm going to talk as if Lisa Nichols is talking to me after the interview. And I literally said, thank you for your gift. Those were the words I used. And then, and so I said a few of those things in the car, and then I went and did the interview. And then at the interview, she said, like, it was like I manifested her comments at the end of the interview. And I mean, you could argue that's coincidence or whatever you want to argue, but I thought that was fascinating. And that's a backstory too, probably why that interview is also meaningful as I tried that and it played out exactly as I had kind of manifested playing out. So there you go.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, I just keep seeing connections with the hypochondria, and the reason why I see it is it does feel like setting intentions, like what's in front of me, what do I care about, what am I trying to do, what am I wanting to get out of this, and then being intentional about it, like even if it is manifesting or whatever, that sense of this is what I want to see for my life. How am I going to live into that? How am I going to be that person who is worthy of that comment, or who is doing the thing that gets me there? And I think, whatever, I have a lot more respect nowadays than I used to for just some of those mental games we play. And I don't even know if they're really games. I don't know if that's fair to call them games anymore. Because I've seen how the games that I can play in my own head about worrying about things, or concerned that I'm not going to be taken seriously, or whatever it might be. If I focus on that, then that's how I show up.
Mm-hmm.
But if I focus on who I am, who it could be, I show up differently. I think that's the same for everybody.
Yeah, I think there's both sides to it, right? There's the side of we might feel or think something is true, and then I think there's the side of we've tested this, and I mean individually, but also some of it's even been scientifically tested. But a great example to what you just said about how you show up and how you can be intentional about it is I went one time to a learning annex, and Tony Robbins was one of the keynotes, and in the audience, what he did was he got everybody. There was like 10,000 realtors and me. Like I think I was like the only realtor, not non-realtor in the room. But there was like I actually bought the tickets off PBS. I remember they had a special, and you could make a donation and get the tickets, which I would have bought anyway. And I bought them for me, a friend and I. We're the only two realtors not in the room, and in fact, he was a retired realtor. So that's why I say I might have been the only one. But what they did, what Tony Robbins did, is he got us each to turn to the person to our right, and then take a pen and sell it to the person. Even if you didn't have a pen, he said sell an invisible pen. But he wanted you to sell it to the person. But what he wants you to do before you start selling is think of the worst day of your life. So whatever that is to you, like somebody passed away, whatever that looks like to you, worst day of your life. And then he wanted you to go to the the person on the left, the other side, and he wants you to sell the pen as if it was the best day of your life. Got married, pregnant, happy with this person, whatever that looks like again, biggest sale you've ever made. And then and he didn't tell us what he wants to do with that. And then he got the person to your right to tell you how your body was and how you were. And then the person to the left to tell you. And of course, when you were selling the pen in the best day of your life, your chest was out, you were happier, you spoke louder, you were more confident, you were excited. And when it was the worst day of your life, your chest was down, you spoke lower, you sounded more depressed. And what he said is, there's your proof that you can decide on your mindset before you go into your next call. And so it was a sales room. So I did that. I started doing that in my sales career. I would start saying, because I realized I used to go, oh, great, here we go. Going to get rejected here. Because if you're out selling and doing cold calls, 90% of it's rejection. So yeah, you start believing that story. And then all of a sudden, of course, I go in and get rejected. And what I said was, I'm going to go in and I'm going to have a great call. I may not sell anything, but I'm going to have a great call. And I started doing that. But I would think the best day of my life, use the same image all the time. And of course, I probably don't have to tell you, my sales went higher. I had better experiences. People said, you seem happier when I come back to the office. So my point is, to me, I don't know how you could argue that if you think of the best day of your life versus the worst day, you're going to have a different energy and you're going to have a different experience when you show up. So to me, I look at like something like that and I'm like, I don't know who's going to argue that one. Just like I don't know who's going to argue that there's such a thing as negative or positive energy. You know, a dog that's growling at you has a different energy than a dog that's happy to see you. How can you argue that? But then the part that we could debate and question and everything else is, can we truly, like, thoughts become things? Can we truly create a vehicle that we want to buy if we focus on it all the time? That's the part that I think is debatable, and some people think is pseudoscience, and other people say I use it every day of my life. And honestly, I was at Hayos conference 2 weeks ago, and John Holland, a medium. Now, I'm not really big on. I'm still early on buying into like us talking to dead people. I'm still not there yet. But one of the things he said that made me buy into him more is he kept saying, "This is what we believe." And like he said, I haven't died for 5 years to tell you this is what happens 5 years after you died. And he said, I don't know anybody else who has. So he said, this is what we believe to be true. And I really respected that because mostly people say, this is how it works. When somebody dies, this is what happens. But at most, we've had people that have died for like 5 minutes. So how can we say, you know, once you're gone, a few years from now, this happened? People say that with all absolute confidence. And what I'm saying is, how do we know for sure? But if you say I believe that, then I can get behind that. So the same idea with manifestation, law of attraction, I really think it's like, here's what I believe. And here's what I used to believe. So I used to believe it was all witchcraft. I didn't know what it was. And I was confused by it. And I couldn't even understand how you could bring nothing into something. And now my belief is that you can. And interestingly enough, if you look at my life, it's a reflection of the things I believe. Like my vision board, 2 vision boards in a row, and I got to do a new one soon. Literally, you can go and there's like, if there was 10 things on the vision board, 8 were done in a year. And I'm confident in saying most people would look at that vision board at the start of the year and say, those 8 things can't be done in 1 year. So did I bring them into life, or was I so confident I made them happen? I don't know what the answer is, but I'll tell you, Andrea, I'm okay if I'm wrong and still manifesting these things.
You
So
know,
that's
I think that's fair, you know, because I think what can happen is we can go through life as a critic and analyze everybody else and analyze our own lives, and not everybody does this, but I definitely know that can happen. And instead of seeing possibilities, we feel trapped. We feel like it's inevitable. And the real truth is that we have agency and we can make things happen. And so the question is, what does it take? And if having a vision board and believing that you can do it is helpful, why wouldn't we embrace that a little more?
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing, right? Like my thing is, whether I'm right or wrong, if what I'm doing is having an impact for the right reasons because I believed I was right, I'm all in. It's the same with the placebo thing, right? Like, you know, you hear and that stuff's been proven that people, if they believe they're taking a certain medication or whatever, they get better. It's not absolute, it's not 100%, but let's say 95%. If they get better because they thought they were taking a pill they weren't really taking, who cares? They got better. That's
Yep,
my thing. And
I
and
know
maybe
it.
and maybe on the placebo side, maybe without somebody, quote unquote, tricking them into thinking they're taking it, they couldn't believe strong enough themselves that they were taking a placebo. In other words, maybe they couldn't will themselves into believing I'm better, I'm better, I'm better. But by believing they had this thing and now they're better, well, then maybe they can go, oh my God, that worked. I really didn't have to take that. And then that gives them the strength in the future to realize, oh, I don't really have this thing that's in my head or whatever that looks
Mm,
like. And this is speaking from somebody who battled hypochondria for 4 years.
yeah.
What I'm getting at is that whether you believe it to be true or not, as long as it does what you're hoping in your belief, then I'm all in.
I think it's fascinating. This has been a really fun conversation, Corey. I've got a couple more questions for you. My first one is, where can people find you and your book and your podcast?
So I'm going to make that easier today than I sometimes do, because I've learned, and you probably learned this as well, being in the podcasting space, that if you give people 3 websites, they usually go to 0. If you give them 1, they usually go to 1. So I'm not going to try to say, here's the different places. So I'm going to send one place, which is also how you can find the rest anyway, which is really the website for the new book. So it's thisisthebook.com. So
Okay.
thisbook.com. And when you go there, basically how we've set it up is that you go and the retailer links are on there. So we're not asking you to buy it directly from us. You go to your like Walmart, Target, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, what have you. Click on the link, you go there, you grab your book, but it'll give you step 1, step 2. You come back, you put in the order number, and then we're going to give you some bonuses that you wouldn't get if you just bought it directly from the retailer. Without me looking, top of my mind, the bonuses, one, it's a lesson that I taught at Stanford that I've never shared publicly. It's a video of me with a flip chart teaching a lesson for how you can actually charge more based on what I've learned from studying the top speakers, experts, and brands. What are the 5 things they do that they all have in common? So that's in there. You get access to my top 10 insight guide, which is a PDF about my top favorite quotes, insights that I've learned during my interviews. You get access to the newest version of my Get Paid to Speak book for those that want to eventually get on stages and speak. You get access to our How to Land a Brand to Talk training, which that program, the bigger program, is $5,000, and you get the training. So a masterclass that we did for a group, you get access to that for free. So I say for free, it's like a $16 book. So you're spending $16. And then the 5th one is escaping me, but I think it's oh, I remember what it is. Natalie Ledwell and Glenn Ledwell launched a thing called Mind Movie shortly after The Secret came out. And anyway, they sent us videos, exclusive videos that we used in our influencer vault. And this is revealed from the vault. So you get 3 interviews from them about how to goal set, how to live your life, how to launch a business. So all of that is completely free just by entering in, the bonus, the order number into the bonus section. And so that's where I would recommend people go there, get your bonuses. Why not? And the one thing I'll add, not to confuse people too, Andrea, but we have a boot camp coming up at the end of May. So if people are listening to this before that, just a side note, I don't know if this will be on the website or if this is going to be a Corey exclusive thing, but if you buy 3 copies of the book, I will say from 3 separate retailers, and send me, and I'll give you the email, but send me the order numbers, then what I'll do is I'll actually give you access to our 3-day virtual boot camp. And the big one is the recordings. So we used to do it with recordings at $97. We got rid of them and offered it for free, and people were complaining that we're offering it for free because they want the recordings in case they couldn't make it. So now I said, instead of the $97, why don't I do it for 3 books, which is $45? It helps me sell 3 books. It gives you 2 books to give away, and you get to learn from. I don't have time to go into it all, but their boot camp is like, we have 15-minute laser coaching sessions you can tap into for free. We have networking. We do major prizes. We've brought on guests like Les Brown, Lisa Nichols. I do trainings as well around speaking, writing, getting interviewed. So it's basically a 3-day virtual weekend. You get it all for free, and you could get the recordings for getting 3 copies of the book. So either go get a single copy, enter your order number, get the bonuses, or grab 3 copies, send me the order numbers at Corey, Corey, at Blue, BLU, Talks with an S on the end.com. So Corey at bluetalks.com. Send me the info, and we'll make sure we get you the bonuses and also get you in for the boot camp.
All right. That's quite the deal. Okay, so my last question for you, and maybe there's a way to tie this together with the question that you basically ask. But the last question I always ask is, what last piece of advice do you have for someone who wants to be a voice of influence, especially if they're on the plane next to you and you've got all this wisdom to share?
Wow. This is one of those things where you can probably imagine my head swimming of which direction I can go with this, because there is like, what I tell you now might be different than tomorrow, only because there's a few different things that
Sure.
come right to mind.
What comes up?
So what comes up to me is, so this is what I did. So this is what comes up is I would, and John Lee Dumas, who I mentioned earlier, used to ask this question: if I dropped you anywhere, $500 in your pocket, you didn't know anybody, what would you do next? Well, my answer, one of those times, at least I was on there, was the same answer, similar answer, is I would find out who are the people that are having the biggest impact on others. And I would figure out a way I can get in their company, and I would start learning from them, and I would apply what I learned. So if I was talking to a passenger on a plane, I would say, start taking and when I say impacting others, I'm not even just saying influencers. I'm saying, who do you know that's positively impacting lives? I would want to learn what they know. And so I would find a way, whether that's buying them lunch, whether that's in the case of podcasts, we have an excuse, which is why it's great to have a podcast, is maybe I'd say, well, I want to feature you. I want to profile you. I want to introduce you to my audience. And I also want to learn from you at the same time. But the takeaway from that is I would get around the people that know what I don't know. And I would do everything I could to learn what they know that I don't know. And then I would take action on what they know and I don't know.
Hmm. Great. Well, Corey, it's been so fun to reconnect and to have this conversation today. Thank you so much for being a voice of influence for our listeners.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It's been an absolute pleasure.